and welcome to Remembering Charlie Watts. Today, Vince Lupo, my co-host from Remembering Woodstock, we're going to be doing a special day on Charlie Watts, who recently just passed away about a week ago. And we're also going to be talking about the fact that 2021 marks the 50th anniversary of Sticky Fingers. So let's get right into it. Vince, you obviously are a guy that has an interesting perspective for the fact that for 11 years of your life you played in a Rolling Stones tribute band, kind of playing the role of Charlie Watts and all those songs he made famous. So, and I've seen some posts you made since Charlie passed, how it really affected you. So I thought you were the guy to talk to. So why don't we get right into it, and you tell us how you first became a Stones fan, and what was it about Charlie's playing that really kind of inspired you?
Okay, so hi everybody. When did I first become a Stones fan?
I guess your story of how you
understand.
Yeah.
When they first came out, there was nothing not to like.
Yeah.
Except that they were playing all the older blues material, and I was never that big of a blues fan.
Yeah.
And of course, it was the bad boys versus the good boys, the Stones versus the Beatles. I was more of a big Beatle fan, more of a big Beatle fan way back in the beginning. But the one song that turned me into a total Rolling Stones fan was Jumpin' Jack Flash.
Oh, wow.
Which came out in the summer of '68, I believe it was, because I remember being on the beach with the portable, a transistor, listening to that song through that, thinking, wow, this is something completely different.
Yeah.
And then the next album that came after that was Beggar's Banquet.
Yeah.
Totally got into that. That really cemented it. And then after that was Let It Bleed, which was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
And then after that, at the same time, right about then, was the Get Your Ya-Ya's Out live
album. Yeah.
And then right after those, this came out. And according to what I've been reading up on the album, it was recorded starting in March of '69, which was when after Brian Jones had passed.
Yeah, just shortly after, yeah.
Right, so this was the first album that
featured Mick Taylor.
Right, nothing to do with Brian Jones. It was all Mick Taylor. The Mick Taylor period was from roughly the Beggar's Banquet. He was on a little bit of that, and then going forward, the rest of those records.
Wow.
Until after after Exile, I think he was on one more. I forget what was the one. Oh, Goat's Head Soup. I think he left after Goat's Head Soup.
Okay. Wow.
So that's the real beginning of my loving the Stones. Now, you were going to ask me?
Well, I was going to ask you. Okay, you mentioned Jumpin' Jack Flash. That was kind of the first song that hooked you. Now, when you first listen to that song, it's kind of got a little. It's not just exactly a rock song. It's got a little bit of a R&B, like kind of a black feel to it. How surprised were you to learn there was a bunch of English guys doing that?
Well, that's what they grew up with. All of those people there in London, on that East Coast, they all got American music.
Mm-hmm.
So they were all into that. The American records being brought over into the ports, like in Liverpool, where the Beatles were. They got the imports from our country over there, and it was a lot of whatever was rock and roll, but a lot of the blues, the R&B stuff, was in the record shops, which were the one owned by Brian Epstein. That's how the Beatles got their material from overseas here. Same thing in London. They got all their records from here, and that's how Mick and Keith met on a train station, noticing that I think it was Mick that was holding some American records, and they had a conversation. Hey, I like that same stuff. We should get together maybe, and that's how the Stones officially started.
And it's interesting that you mentioned like kind of the Beatles versus the Stones, Bad Boy versus Good Boys, and you've probably seen it too. Being a guy who played in a tribute band before, I've seen like a lot of these. You have these Stones and these Beatles tributes, and they'll kind of play like they have like competitions almost like when some of these bands get together. The Beatles versus the Stones, and which one do you like better? And it's amazing because like you're saying, a lot of those British bands from London and that. Their big dream was to come over here to the United States, and a lot of the American bands, they were into the British bands at the time.
Yeah, how well, really flip-flopping the. But that's what happened. The Americans got influenced to change the style here because it was really the doo-wop and the really syrupy, sugary pop convections that were being thrown out there. There were a few that were borderline, like of those guys that were really edgy rock. And when you go a little bit further back into the doo-wop, I didn't like the doo-wop period of America, but I still do love the Four Seasons. But they're not the doo-wop. They got away from all of that and really had contemporary sounding, feeling, produced tunes. But to get to Charlie, we're talking about specifically Charlie.
Yeah.
Let me just backtrack to just last week. When I first heard the news, my wife actually pulled it up on her computer.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh my God! And what? Charlie died. Is this real?
Yeah, you almost nowadays when you see stuff like that, you're like, is this a real story? And then you kind of know it is when more and more sites are reporting it.
Right, and that's exactly what happened. Within 30 seconds, I looked it up, and I saw it was confirmed on a number of news
sources,
outlets. So I was like, oh, and I'll tell you, this is between the audience and you and me. It's not a private thing. I cried on and off all day.
Oh, I bet,
like it was a family member who had died. But for you and for the efficacy of everybody else who's listening to this, why? It was because of when I got into starting to play Charlie in the fall of 2008, was that I had to learn the nuts and bolts of what he does in the music, and then you learn who he is as a person, and all of these fantastic bits and pieces about him started to emerge, and then, and only then, did I get the really true appreciation of what Charlie's input was to the band. Now, what was that? It was just being a solid backbone timekeeper, and he was a jazz guy. We all know this, but in that band, he supplied what they needed. And the story apparently goes like this, according to Keith. Keith said, I could always depend on Charlie. He would come into the studio when we were going to learn something new. I would show him a song on guitar. Like they really didn't do that many demos in order to put something together. Here's how it kind of goes. And he just started playing it, and then they just kind of let it develop from there, and that was that. He goes, I didn't have to do much more than just to kind of show him how it goes. He developed his part, and then away they went. Yeah. So that's how many of the songs were developed through the years that we all know, especially the earlier days. Yeah. So, but to get to know him intimately from inside the music, since all we were doing was Stones. There's nothing that. And
here's the thing: people may have trouble kind of putting their heads around is like I've seen pictures of when you played with the band. You look enough like Vince Lupo. I don't know if it's a lot of it's probably dress and you look the part. It's kind of like an actor doing a role, but I've seen other tribute bands. Like I know this guy that he plays the role of Axl Rose in a Guns N' Roses tribute. Does a great job. He sounds like him. He dresses the part. And, you almost pinch yourself. You swear that was Axl Rose from 1987. And my point being, I'd imagine it's a lot more than just dressing the part. You got to be able to play the drum parts. Because if you just get up there and kind of dress the part, for the part, but you can't really play the tunes, people aren't going to come and watch that if you're just, kind of putting on a suit and a tie.
Absolutely. What got us partly on the right track was developing the right feel for the song. I've always played these songs.
Yeah, of course.
Through the years, but not specifically like him. So besides maybe I resemble him a little bit and put the makeup and stuff on, but also the mannerisms. He has specific mannerisms. So try to mimic his mannerisms. He has that funky little lift off on the third beat of the hi-hat lift.
Yeah.
The third beat, which is the snare hit. To learn all of the different ways that he uses the toms and the kick, and how he smacks the snare with the traditional, what they call a jazz grip. All of these little elements had to go into recreating Charlie.
Yeah, so like when you guys do a show, like I'd imagine it's almost like, because I'd almost seen it before my own eyes when other tribute bands, you almost kind of morph yourself into Charlie, and it's more than just playing those drum parts. You got to kind of become him.
Absolutely. What I wrote on Facebook was I spent X amount of years in his skin, in his head, essentially, and trying to emulate him, to be him, and that transports you into the role so much easier when you're consciously
doing it,
submerging yourself as deeply as I did in the music through the years. Whenever I played those songs with any other band, it's the same thing.
Yeah,
I'm doing the same thing, except I don't have the hair and the makeup on and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
You know, just so you know, and the audience knows, the kit that I was playing is the Gretsch three-piece, the two toms and the kick, with the snare to make his sound and exactly what he played, except the 20-inch kick drum instead of a 22 that Charlie has. The Gretsch sound is fantastic, but with the snare, he used a DW specific. So I researched it, and I called DW. I need for you to please make me a snare to these specifications. And I told them, and they made me a custom snare, so we can get the exact snare sound with that kit, and the tuning too of the toms. I tuned them according to how he plays them on records, so that when you hear the actual drums, the shells, with the same type of heads, tuned the exact same way, sounds like Charlie. What also makes it is the cymbals that he used. For example, his ride cymbal, where you ting ting ting, where you're playing the along, is a flat ride, has no bell on it. That's for jazz drummers. And what that does is a very pingy type of sound versus a big, bold rock sound. So he would use that. And then for his crash cymbal, he eventually went to something called a UFIP, UFIP, China cymbal, which is made in Italy. So I actually got that. I bought that before we even went out and played a gig.
Oh, wow.
And it makes everything sound so authentic to his playing when later in the live years, over the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah, you know, the Rolling Stones, one thing I love about them is, you know, they got their classic kind of catalog, those tunes, you know, like Start Me Up, Jumpin' Jack Flash, Satisfaction, Honky Tonk, all those tunes we know and love. But then they've also, through the years, continued to put out new music. So how exciting was it for you, Vince, not to just get a chance to play those classics that we all know and love, but kind of throw in some of the newer tunes?
Well, I got the whole catalog. And because of you never know what song we want to pick up. When you listen to all of these newer records, some of them are panned by critics, I think unfairly. Because when some of those tracks that never make it to radio and that you listen to, Bigger Bang album, fantastic. The Blues album that won the Grammy for Best Record. Wow, that thing, they did that in 3 or 4 days, I think it was, that they recorded.
In fact, I'll tell you a great tune that I kind of forgot about myself and I rediscovered the other day prepping for this was, it was off one of the, newer albums, maybe from the early 90s, like, it was called Almost Hear You Sigh. I thought that was a very different kind of sounding tune, but it really kind of said something to me.
Yeah, they have, there's so many like that,
Yeah.
and that stuff, but that are unknown by title, that you listen to, go, wow, this is a really nice piece of music. Is some rock really underground?
Like Steel Wheels, that's another one of those kind of great albums that came out later in their career, but it's kind of their comeback, if you will.
Really super album. Really
yeah.
super album, that album. I also would like at this point to we're going to start introducing the Sticky Finger stuff.
Yeah, let's get into it.
And still talk about Charlie at the same time.
Yeah, let's get into it. So Sticky Fingers was, just to give people a reference frame, was released April 23rd, 1971. So again, this album is about as old as I am, but yet it came out a little before I did. And yet, all through my life, this is one of those albums that I just, one of my favorite tunes, I'll tell you on this album is, it's called, let me see here, Dead Flowers. Now, the funny thing is, I'll tell you, I know you told me, I think you met Gilby Clarke before. First version of this song I ever heard actually was Gilby's version on his first solo album, Pawn Shop Guitars. He kind of really rocks it up. And then I went and listened to the Stones version, which I had never heard before that. And their version is quite different. It almost sounds kind of like a swampy country rock tune, but I was digging it because, again, it's the original, and it's just something about that song. It's also been covered by Poison.
Yeah. Well, it is country, and what was happening, reading behind the scenes, reading into the research of this, that song and a few others, very influenced by Mick Taylor doing his country bit with this particular song, because apparently Keith was in and out of the recording session.
Wow.
So this was one of the ones that they said, hey, we're going to just change this up a little bit, and they went country, and it was a huge, if not a hit, an album.
But you always hear, it's one of those tracks you always hear on the radio, even 50
everybody
years.
wants to have, can you play Dead Flowers? Well, we can play it. Will we? I don't know.
Have you ever played it? And is it a
Yes,
difficult song to play, or? Not really?
We played the original version, and I've played this original version with other bands as well. But it's a cool song. It's not my favorite.
No, but
the album, but it's many people's favorite.
That's what I'm saying. It's one that people always kind of they're aware of that song. Another song that kind of, I dare say, is probably the closest thing to a metal song that the Stones has ever done would have to be "Bitch." I mean, and that's quite a different tune for them.
To me, that's a really good, hard-edged R&B song because it's got the horns in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's got a lot of edge, a lot of energy. That was one of the ones that was a staple in the repertoire of the band. So really enjoyable to play. And then the track that opens this album, Brown Sugar, that's of course that's a classic that everybody knows and loves. That's just one of those tunes. It's along with Satisfaction, Honky Tonk Woman. You're always hearing it on the radio. Exactly. Now here's the story behind Brown Sugar, as told by Jerry Greenberg. Are you ready?
Sure. Yeah.
We're ready. Okay. So Jerry Greenberg and another partner came and saw us at Paula Casino in a place that was the Infinity Room on the inside, and we kind of really didn't know who was. I didn't really know that much about Jerry, but before he came, we were told what was going on. Okay. So I'm excited now to meet Jerry Greenberg. Who's Jerry Greenberg?
Yeah, exactly.
He was the main A&R guy, and the kind of ran the Atlantic Records.
Oh, wow.
So he was directly under Ahmet Ertegun, who owned the label. Jerry, at 32, had become their first president in 1974.
Oh, wow.
So here's the story from Jerry to me that we heard. Jerry was told, Jerry told us by the Jagger, when they wanted to release the album here, they signed the band to Atlantic using the Rolling Stones records.
Yeah.
We'll get to the cover and the logo in a minute.
Okay.
So going through the songs on the album, and Ertegun and Jagger wanted a different song, as the first release off of the album. Hettrigan said Greenberg wants Brown Sugar, but no, we want this other song to be no. He's picked 5 consecutive number ones for my record company. This is the one that's going to be the first one coming off the album.
Okay.
It's their biggest hit.
Wow.
Wouldn't you say? Other than Satisfaction?
Yeah, that's the one too. I mean, even the casual Rolling Stones fan is going to know that tune, or Satisfaction.
Know that's right.
Yeah.
So this is how that happened. When I personally first met him, was before we played the show. And I went out to the audience, and his back was towards me, and I tapped him on the shoulder. I'm in full makeup now.
Wow.
The whole get-up. And he turned around, and he kind of like got pulled back, and he went, "Oh my God, you do look like Charlie Watts."
Wow. Yeah, you do. Yeah.
To hear it from him.
Yeah.
That's all the validation that I needed.
Yeah.
So he stood all night with his partner, gauging the crowd, gauging us, and signed us to an agency deal.
Oh wow!
So that's how our band really got going after
that. I bet
about 6 months. Right after 6 months, but we never really needed to pay the dues because we just never did. There was other circumstances that we bypassed. Needing to get all the
I bet, and
the good gigs,
and getting back to Sticky Fingers, another interesting fact I was reading up on is Sticky Fingers is the 9th British and 11th American studio album by the English rock band the Rolling Stones, of course, and that should be known because, like I said, they were of course known in their home country, England first, but by the time they released Sticky Fingers in America, that's the very first album that they'd released on their independent Rolling Stones record, which they've released everything since that on their label
with virtually full control.
Yeah.
So when they put the logo together, that was, they're very protective of that logo.
Yeah.
So the object for any of these tribute bands is don't steal
our logo.
The logo.
Yeah.
So it's okay to make something that's similar to it, but you can't take that because they will sue.
Yeah.
They will sue. With the album cover that we all know with the zipper, and the double entendre of the suggestiveness of the title of the album, that zipper, that whole album cover was shot by Andy Warhol.
Yeah, I was reading.
And it's supposed to be his lover. Okay. At the time, but it could have been his lover's twin.
Yeah, and what I heard about that is initially people thought it was Mick Jagger's crotch on the cover, but of course he says no, it's not.
Oh, we all thought that.
Yeah.
We all thought, and something that I picked up from reading. I don't know if you remember this, but they had to ship the album with the zipper halfway down, because when the zipper was all the way up, where the latch part was scratching
in the vinyl
into the vinyl, so they had to put it more like in the center of the record, so it would have the most minimal damage ever. I remember getting the album within the first week.
And I remember I was reading up too that I think the Sticky Fingers album was the first album where it had a cover like that. Probably the only album that was any kind of artistic thing like that before was the Beatles' Lonely Hearts. Sergeant.
With all that artwork?
The
Sgt. Pepper's?
Yeah, I mean, it was such a...
That's right.
I mean, it was such a, thing, a big thing to just kind of produce those things because of artwork and everything. And I think Sticky Fingers probably is the last kind of real artistic album cover where they did anything like that.
That's right. And when you go down the song list, Brown Sugar kicks it off, so bang, you start off with a bang, and then it goes into the song Sway, which I love that song. It's one of my real favorites off of this record. Just really bluesy, real good. A lot of Charlie parts in that song, and then there's Wild Horses.
That's a great one.
Everybody knows it.
I love that. I love the version too they did on that Unplugged record they put out.
Wild Horses?
Yeah.
Yes. It's a fun one to play.
Yeah.
The harmonies are really cool. You don't think of Owens having these really cool harmonies, but that particular song, yes.
And then, as a drummer, what's it like? Because, okay, I could see you kind of really rocking out on a song like Brown Sugar, playing those Charlie Watts parts, but kind of Wild Horses, you kind of slow it down a little. I guess that's maybe a little more of his jazz influence coming out. You know, you're not banging on those drums so much.
You know, it almost feels like it's more of a heavy drum feel, less with the jazz. I think the one after that has more jazz, but it's not really Charlie.
Yeah. Can you hear me knocking? Yeah, that's another.
Can you hear me knocking?
Yeah.
There, when you go over the, and I heard this before, and I basically, what's that word? Had it confirmed. Mm-hmm. When you go on who plays what on these songs. Mm-hmm. So that's not. And on who plays what under number 4 for additional personnel is Rocky Dijon plays the congas.
Okay.
So that's not Charlie.
Okay.
Right? Nicky Hopkins plays the piano, and he was one of the all-time great rock keyboardists ever. Probably one of my very favorites of all time. Died too young. Bobby Keys on the tenor. And Billy Preston on the organ. So that's who you hear doing those organ parts.
Oh, okay, wow.
Preston.
Yeah.
Now, listed is Jimmy Miller under percussion. Now, Jimmy Miller was the album's producer.
Yeah.
Engineer, right?
Yeah.
He played the drums on this. It's not Charlie.
Oh, wow, interesting.
Yeah, from everything that, maybe I'm wrong, but everything that I learned and this particular song, Miller, because it's a completely different feel and sound than anything.
Yeah.
It's jazzy.
Yeah.
And then that whole back half of everything that we know, with the big sax solo and then the guitar solo, and then they come together at the end. That was set up as a total jam.
Wow.
We're gonna jam. So they must have talked it out. Okay, you've got this much. You've got this much, and then we're going to come together and knock it out. So all of those little da-da-da-da,
yeah.
that happened on the fly in the recording studio exactly as we hear it.
Yeah, and then the next one is "You Gotta Move." That's another cool tune that a lot of people may not be aware, but it's on Sticky Fingers, and I just checking it out myself for the first time. I thought, wow, how is it that I've never heard of this one before?
A nice little blues tune.
Yeah.
It wasn't written by them. The writers of this is Fred McDowell and Gary Davis. So all they did was they just redid it. And in fact, there's this bass drum thing that sounds like one of those old marching drums with the solid, the hollow, mute. It's not muted. It just sounds like boom.
Yeah.
But it's really a funny sound on this. So it's kind of comical. It's kind of cool that they did this blues tune at the bed, like away, but not to me,
Yeah.
And then the side 2. Listen, we had to have a record player to be able to turn an album over.
Yeah. That's back in the days when you could still. I fondly remember myself when you used to be able to go in local record store and buy records.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The next one was Bitch, and we talked about Bitch. It's got the great horn lines. It's got a nice hook right in the middle, and the riff.
In fact, you may not be aware of this, Vince, but another band that covered that is this band called the Dead Daisies on their album a few years back, and the singer was John Corabi, but they kind of just did a killer version of that.
How would you compare the two?
Well, interestingly enough, that's again, I'd never heard the Stones version for the Dead Daisies, so that's kind of my reference point. But then I went back and heard the original, and I think they stayed pretty true to it. But I was shocked the first time I heard the Stones version, because again, that's for a Stones song, that's probably about the heaviest thing I've ever heard them do.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Now that next song, I Got the Blues, I'm going to tell everybody, stop what you're doing if you're listening to this album and listen to that song. That's my favorite tune off of the record.
Oh, wow.
Very deep song, great brass on that song. So it's actually a really super good blues tune that's bluesy.
Yeah.
But it's not flat out
I mean, it kind of, the title itself says everything you need to know. I got the blues, like
pretty much.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And the next one is Sister Morphine.
And the funny part about this that I just recently learned, never knew, Mary Ann Faithfull is one of the writers of the song with that.
Interesting. Oh, okay.
I had no clue. That's a really dark. We all know that's a.
Yeah,
really dark
she's a unique artist. I know that goes way back. But she's kind of still allowed herself to kind of stay relevant, even since working with the Stones. I mean, probably the last artist that she kind of did something with was with Metallica, which is kind of a very different artist for her to be working with. But I think that says all you need to know about Mary Ann Faithfull.
Right,
Yeah.
and I do remember she's been in the news lately, but and partly with the Charlie passing, but it with other things. But that's a very deep, dark song.
Yeah, for a Stone song, you're like, that sounds quite different. But I think that's why it works on the album, and that because while you think of a Rolling Stone as kind of a rock and blues band, this has got kind of everything and then some.
It sure does.
It's almost like experiment, like something with Bitch. You wouldn't expect that when you buy the album maybe initially, and you think, oh wow, this is really something kind of different. This isn't kind of getting really heavy for the Stones.
That's very different. To have those three songs start off side two, to be as different as they can be, and then you've got a country song with Dead Flowers.
Yeah.
And then you've got this mood piece, Moonlight Mile.
Yeah.
That's 5 minutes long or whatever it is, and that's a beautiful piece of music too. And you think they're just rocking out. These guys really came into their own
on this album
from the previous one too. Let It Bleed. Actually, the one before that. Maker's Banquet. They started to really grow from Jumpin' Jack Flash was before that.
It sounds like It sounds like if you just listen to this music and those two albums, like you said, you can almost hear the progression as far as even the songwriting. They became better writers.
Yes, and then that was after this record was when they were going to be heavily taxed, and they needed to run away from Great Britain and go to France, and that's where they did the double album for Exile on Main Street. But this album really is a standout in that period, and to me, Goat's Head Soup, which ended the Mick Taylor era, let's call it, was a stronger album, but weaker overall, but still a strong album. And
what do you think of, what he brought into the band? I mean, Mick Taylor, like he hasn't, you don't hear too much about him anymore. I know he's still alive, but even you don't, you hear anytime anybody references him, former Rolling Stones guitarist, and he deserves that tag. But like him and Keith as a guitar team, what did you think of them together?
I thought it went well because they created 5 of their
best albums. Yeah. And then
6 if you think of the Exile as 2 separate ones.
Yeah. And what did you think when they brought Ronnie Wood in? I mean, he's kind of an obvious choice, another British guy, but I mean, he played with the Faces and Rod Stewart and that, but I think the Stones really put him on the map.
Well, before any of this stuff happened, and they were first a band.
Yeah.
Back in '62 and '63, before they broke really anywhere. Ronnie and them, they were all friends. They all knew one another.
Okay.
And he always said to himself from the very beginning, one day I'm going to be in that band. That's my band.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of become his band, so to speak. I mean, that he's probably the longest running, guitar player since.
Well, yes, he's actually the real Rolling Stone.
Yeah, of course.
No, he's not an original. He's
that's what I'm saying. But
he genuine thing.
Whereas even like I dare say even Daryl Jones, the bass player they've had for several years now, since Bill Wyman's been out of the band. He he may not get paid like an original member, but I think he's been there so long that it's almost like it's become his gig.
Well, he came into the band after Wyman left, which was the early '90s.
Yeah.
Charlie handpicked him because of his playing style. Charlie wanted to play in his style more, and so they kind of fit each other's groove.
And now just think about Daryl Jones. How I mean, I don't know if he just knew of Daryl Jones or if they were friends, but just think how cool that is. Speaking about, remembering Charlie Watts today, that Charlie had that kind of influence within the band. Say, hey, I think this is the guy we should go with, and they went with his recommendation.
And the same thing with the drummer that's taking over right now, Steve Jordan.
Wow.
When Charlie was in this illness period, he said, okay, I can't go out, but I want him to be your guy. So he handpicked him too.
Wow.
Boy,
I mean, again,
it's only been a week, but I sure miss Charlie.
Of course, think how, in a way, think how cool that is. I mean, Charlie's mind, you're like thinking, okay, maybe my days with the band are through, but I want to kind of play a role in picking my own replacement. I mean, not too many people get that opportunity.
That's right. You made mention way back when we started this conversation that you had seen stuff that I posted on my Facebook.
Well, just reading it, I could kind of feel. I was almost going to ask, Vince, are you sure you want to do this week? But I think it's kind of almost like therapy, because I was reading some of the stuff you were posting, and you could almost, you could really feel that you were feeling it,
Well, yes, and I want to thank, if anybody else is listening in the audience who was Facebook with me, thank the people for many people who mentioned me or said about him, hey, you're the first person I thought of with this, and I've gotten well over 500 comments.
That's
from
amazing.
People, likes or actual comments that I comment back to, and it really makes me feel appreciated.
Well, in a way, you're not alone. You're not alone. That you're not the only one feeling that. And in a way, it shows you kind of your influence on what you do. And as far as all these years of playing the role of Charlie in that band, people have been paying attention to Vince Lupo. And I kind of, when I first heard the news too, I wasn't sure, because a couple days before I'd heard Charlie was in the hospital. Didn't say why, but I had no idea he was as ill as he was, obviously. And then a few days later, I see stuff online. I thought, maybe this isn't true. And then all of a sudden, it started to be reported all over the place. And so, okay, it's unfortunately it's true. But you were one of the first people I thought of. And and oftentimes when I post anything about you, Vince, on my site, you see that I'll use that one picture that used to use sometimes in advertisements, and I think it's a real professional looking shot. You look a lot like the guy, and you really got your role down.
Well, thank you, and just thank you to Charlie, wherever you are, that for all the music and for the opportunity that gave me to extend my career. What a perfect guy for me to be able to emulate and to give people a lot of pleasure, because you saw one of the things that I posted was it's my job is making people happy, and I love that. Yeah,
and I was curious if, like Charlie, if you were at all influenced by jazz music.
Absolutely, yes, and that was from the very beginnings.
Okay.
My beginnings.
Yeah.
Because as a kid, we had the little black and white TVs, and they would run the movies from the 30s, 40s, 50s, and so back then I was like the big band stuff.
Yeah.
My mom was a big band fan, and so we had that music in the house. But when I saw the Benny Goodman story and a couple of those other things with Gene Krupa,
wow,
the Gene Krupa, going to town, that was my thing on the playing style, and the swing. So and that Charlie, he swings, and a couple of the band members that have played with us through the year said what makes this band go is my ability to swing the drums, and that's not everybody can do that.
Yeah, and anybody that's
fortunate to be able to.
Anybody that's listened to us, in the past, you remembering Woodstock, knows that you're like a big rock fan and stuff, and a lot of stuff from that era, from the Woodstock era, and obviously the British invasions of American bands from that time. But would you say overall that you start out as a jazz drummer, a rock drummer, and kind of just learned it all, or what?
Repeat that again?
Well, like, Did you start out pretty much as a rock drummer, would you say, and you kind of got into this other stuff along the way, or did you learn how to be a jazz drummer and do all these other different types of music kind of at the same time?
Kind of at the same time.
Yeah.
Even though I was initially influenced from the big band, and then the Beatles came out, it was just months after that I got my kit, because I said to myself, like many kids my age, I think I can do that. I want to do that. I saw the people screaming. I want to be up there. So it's 50-50. And a few years later, in my high school, they developed a jazz band, which they never really had. And I was. They knew I was a drummer. Can you be in the jazz band? Yeah. So because I could swing. The teacher liked that, and I was the lone person in the band that could play the songs by ear while the other guys were reading it, the trumpet, the sax.
Oh, wow, interesting.
They're reading. Yeah. So I'm playing the songs from feel and memory versus needing to learn to read, and the teacher was okay with that. The instructor was okay with that. But I was... I'm just fortunate that I was blessed with, still really, with the ability to feel a lot of different kinds of music. Yeah,
because I'll tell you, I think it makes you a much better musician. I mean, for many reasons. I mean, for one thing, if you can play different types of music, you could get a lot of different types of gigs. I mean, even some of these rock guys that I listen to, like the bass player that's currently in Megadeth, I mean, that's a thrash metal band, but... this guy, he's been all over the place. I mean, before he went back to Megadeth, he was playing with John Fogerty, and people like ask him, "What are you doing playing with a guy like John Fogerty?" He said, "Well, it's good money, it's a good gig, but I can kind of do a little bit of everything. Why not?"
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Just wanted to touch on a few personal things about Charlie.
Go ahead.
He was a homebody. In fact, there's a quote: "I hate leaving home. I love what I do, but I'd love to go home."
In fact, I read something along those lines where Charlie was quoted as saying, I believe it was in 2003, Charlie Watts stated that he had a love-hate attitude in general to touring because he was not as interested as his bandmates were at being a pop idol. Charlie's personal life was much more quieter than the other members of the Rolling Stones.
That's right. Forever, however he could do it, he kept them grounded, but that was a long shot.
And see, that's an interesting thing when you hear stuff like this and you go back and you look at some of the videos and some of the shots of him over years. As great of a drummer as Charlie was, he was not one of those drummers that was a real physical player. He was not kind of over the top. He just kind of did what he did, and it fit and it worked, and that's all he really needed to do.
And that is the whole ball of wax about Charlie's playing. Yeah. You just nailed it right there, kid.
Yeah.
So he even said he never really learned how to play. I got in bands through watching other people play and just copying them. That's how many of us did that anyway, without formal lessons. Yeah. I never really had a formal drum lesson ever.
Yeah. Interesting kind of thing is you look at Charlie Watts, even, up until very recently, right before he died, you look at the man, you would not guess that he was 80 years old. I mean, maybe he had a youthful attitude, maybe because of what he did, but right up till the end, he did not look like he was 80 years old, and that's part of the reason I think people are so shocked. Oh, wow, he was 80 years old? That doesn't...
Well, yes, and he kept himself slim. He didn't let himself go. Mm-hmm. He ate healthy. Mm-hmm. There was a time in his life, I believe it was in the later 70s and some of the 80s, that he did the drugs with all of them, but then pulled himself out of it.
Yeah, in fact, I was reading about that for many years he considered himself to kind of be a moderate drug user, moderate kind of alcohol user, but it eventually got to a point where it did get kind of out of control, kind of problematic, so much to the point that he came very close to losing his wife, he said, and everything that really mattered to him. At that point, he didn't want to lose any of that, so he was able to kick it. But, and he said initially he got into drugs and alcohol just because, he had trouble handling certain situations, and when he'd get stressed out about things, that was his way of kind of dealing with it, like a lot of people do.
Right. Also, a telltale thing was the photographs of him with his shaved head.
Yeah.
And the round colored glasses,
Yeah.
like sunglasses.
Yeah.
It was that period that was pretty much his low period as far as that goes.
Yeah.
What an interesting guy.
And what did you think of him
love
and
of horses
yeah.
and love of families,
yeah.
grandkids, all of that,
Yeah.
Regular guy.
And what did you think of him as Bill Wyman, who we mentioned earlier, like as a rhythm section?
They just clicked in the beginning until they finished. Let's face it. Listen to those records.
Yeah, it says it all.
Everything that was bass is Wyman, by the way. So many of those songs, more than we realize,
or other people,
Keith
as you were
is
saying,
playing the bass. Keith.
Well, you read all the time. There are certain ghost musicians that years later you find out about that played on some of our favorite albums, and like you're saying, Keith Richards maybe for whatever reason the bass player doesn't show up to a recording session, so Keith's like, I'll just throw a bass on and I'll do the part or whatever.
I think part of it was that they didn't like what Wyman was playing, so he said, "No, I think kind of a more of a control. I wanted to come out sounding like this." Because he writing the songs musically had something in his head.
Yeah.
So it needed to sound a certain way.
Yeah, and I'll be real honest with you, Vince. I haven't heard any of it, but I was curious. Because I heard Charlie Watts he put out these solo albums like the Charlie Watts Jazz Orchestra or something like that. You heard any of that stuff, and what did you think of it?
Well, I've seen some video of it, his quintet.
Yeah.
And in fact, I've got a photo poster in my music room of him with the quintet that I will take a picture and I will send to you.
Oh, cool.
So then you can get a good look at what this is. When Charlie was not... Oh, here's something that I just recently learned that I've always kind of known since getting in the band. They would go out, the rest of the guys would go out, party, and rock.
Yeah.
He would split with them and then go to like Birdland. What's Birdland? Birdland's a jazz nightclub in New York City.
Oh, wow.
What's the other place? The Blue Note.
Oh, wow.
These sorts of places. He would hang at the jazz clubs.
And could you imagine? Now, could you imagine being one of those jazz musicians playing in those clubs, and maybe they don't realize it first, but then maybe later find out Charlie Watts, of all people, the drummer from the Rolling Stones, coming in and checking out your band.
Yeah. I could imagine there'd be a little bit of, who's this guy? And who don't recognize him, and I don't think he was one to go in with a big entourage.
Oh, no. See, that's the thing about Charlie Watts that I'm learning more and more about as I read about the guy, even since he passed, is that, if you're kind of a diehard or even a casual Rolling Stones fan, you probably know, probably know Charlie Watts as a drummer of a Rolling Stone. You kind of recognize it, but he's not as heavily recognized maybe as Keith or Mick. They're kind of a two frontmen of a band. So I think, as big of a celebrity as Charlie Watts was, if he liked it or not, I do think there were some times maybe he'd be able to go out to certain clubs like that, and he would not get as heavily recognized as if he was Mick or Keith.
At the point where we think that this was happening, how could he not get recognized?
Yeah.
As one of the three
main guys.
The main cogs were the three guys.
Yeah.
Right. Everybody else came along later. Ronnie's very recognizable. Yeah. But the other people in the band, not so much.
Yeah. In fact, it's kind of interesting because I was reading too that like you said, he was one of the quiet members, probably the quietest member of the band. I read this, even if you can believe this, on Wikipedia, where it's that Charlie was quoted as saying that there was so because I guess he stayed pretty true and loyal to his wife. He didn't want to stray or anything, and so he said like he had to turn down so many sexual offers from groupies. Like when the other guys would go out flirting with the girls, he would just kind of do his own thing, like you were saying.
Yeah, he just wanted to go home.
In fact, it says in 1989 that Charlie, along with the rest of the Rolling Stones, of course, was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And Charlie chose not to appear at the induction because he doesn't like the spotlight. Which sounds kind of crazy, playing in a band like the Rolling Stones. Like you said, he enjoyed playing with the band, he enjoyed getting up there and doing his thing. but he didn't necessarily enjoy everything else that went along with that.
Correct.
Yeah.
And we're lucky, though, because at one point, and I don't know when that point was, 15, 20 years ago, maybe closer to now than then, he decided to start opening up about his life, and people wanted to interview him, so he would give us all of these wonderful one-liner and nuggets, but we started to climb into his head as he started to open up. It's well known he rarely, if ever,
gave an interview,
cracked a smile on stage.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like never, and just really focused on his job. And let's get through the 2 hours and 15 minutes, and then I want to go back to the hotel when he really wanted to be home. And before we wrap this up, I want to say, like talking about Sticky Fingers today, 50 years later, it's one of those albums that it's got a real special place in a lot of people's hearts, and I include myself with that, because I think what really proves how great an album is does it hold up over over a long period of time. I mean, 50 years is a long time for an album was released, to think about 50 years ago as I'm coming into the world, and 50 years later we're still talking about it. These songs are still being played on the radio, and like we're kind of saying, like a lot of bands, not necessarily the latest single off the last Rolling Stones album you're going to hear on the radio, but you're going to hear a lot of this classic stuff that came out 50 years ago. That's right. And also remember, some of these songs off this record, 3 or 4 of them, are always played by cover bands. Everywhere. Everywhere, from here to the East Coast to Japan to Europe. They're all around the world.
And when you used to play in the band, like, how hard was it to come up with a set list? I mean, obviously you got to play the hits everybody wants to hear that we've been talking about, but like if you were to throw in a bitch or something like that, did people ever come up to you guys and say, hey, what was that? Was it a tune you guys played? I never heard it before. Did they think it was like...
This is an interesting part of the conversation, because when we very, very, very first got together to have a 5-member, the core member, talk, they came to my house, and it was my suggestion that because we were in our 50s at the time, we were a little older, hey, we should portray them as they are now, versus trying to be the young 60s or their 70s. We should do this, and we'll have our own little niche in the market, and that proved to be maybe a semi-wise thing that we did, and we went on from there and developed the show off of the which album was it? The live video that they did in New York City with Scorsese, that movie.
Oh, I know what. Yeah, okay, yeah.
I can't think of the name. Sorry, I can't think of the name of the movie. So we took that concert and analyzed how they did it, and about the 4th or 5th song was where the ballad comes in.
Okay.
So that's what we did. We usually started off with 2, 3 big hits, ended up with 2, 3, 4 big hits, and then scattered everything about, sandwiching a song that you might not know so well between 2 big songs. That way it would fly. You put the big song, and then the other one a little bit less, but you're educating an audience, and then you play another big hit around it. It's like sandwiching. You know? So that seems to really work well. The 90-minute format works well. For that, you get to play about 15, 16, 17 songs in that, depending. 3 long ones, or you're going to do 1 long one and a bunch of shorter ones.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing about a band like the Rolling Stones is I think they've even up to the last album they did, they've stayed pretty authentic all these years. They haven't really kind of altered what they do. They've thrown in a couple surprises that we've been talking about. But like back in the 80s, a lot of times I remember listening to music, and they almost had, the record companies almost had it down to a formula where, okay, well, the first thing we're going to release is kind of like a rockin' tune. Second tune we got to release is a ballad, whereas the Stones have never really kind of done that. They just kind of stuck to what they did.
They stuck to Keith Richards' riffs.
Yeah.
Play the riff, and let's get the lyric. He'd come up with a riff, they'd come up with the lyric, they'd put the rest of the song together, and away they go, which is what you're saying.
Yeah.
They didn't really they changed through the years, the recording techniques and the different
But
players.
you didn't have like, you didn't get ever like the Rolling Stones grunge album or something like that, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
They stayed very true to themselves, and if we know their personalities, that's exactly what came out is exactly what has happened to this day.
Yeah.
If I was them, I wouldn't think of changing anything.
Why?
From the beginning till now, I wouldn't change a darn thing.
Yeah, and you know, what did you think about the period for, like, you know, up until they did Steel Wheels? There was that period where for about 5 or 6 years, for whatever reason, maybe friction between Mick and Keith, which was rumored at the time, they didn't do anything. And then all of a sudden they put out Steel Wheels, and they've kind of been nonstop ever since. I mean, what did you do for that 5 or 6 years? You just kind of listen to your favorite Stones albums, or?
Well, of course.
Yeah.
And everything else, but also Charlie was doing. That's when he was really doing his jazz stuff, and because he needed something to do.
Yeah.
What else? Keith had the Expensive Winos.
I remember.
By the way, the drummer was one of the guys from Expensive Winos, the Steve Jordan.
Okay.
So that's how he still became in the picture. And so they all kind of did their little things while they had, if they had a falling out, maybe they want to say they took a break.
Yeah, which I guess
it's Rachel, they were on a break.
A smart thing, I guess, in there, because they came back stronger and better than ever. But you know, it's amazing because Mick Jagger, he's a huge talent in his own right. But it's amazing that none of his solo records were as big as any of the Rolling Stone albums. And again, I think it's one of those things is not saying anything about his talent as a solo artist, but I think it's just maybe when these guys got together, there was just that special magic thing.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
It's that you want that sound with his voice.
Yeah.
At least I do.
Yeah.
You know, and it's hard for me to
imagine.
Not imagine, what's that word? To glom onto, to really enjoy.
Yeah.
Him doing a solo album, because there's just so much of his voice that can go with other music. Other musicians, rather. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But I guess that's an easy explanation for it.
Yeah, and you know, so Charlie, like, just to kind of wrap this up, I seen that he was, you know, he, like I said, he was 80 years old, so he's lived quite the life. He was born, it said, June 2nd, 1941, so that's going way back, before either of us. And then August 24th, 2021, that's, of course, the day he died.
A week ago yesterday.
Yeah, and you would know.
Tough.
Yeah, and probably the last thing, really, before we wrap this up today, is I also read he was affectionately known, and this nickname was given to him by Mick Jagger, as the Wembley Whammer.
The Wembley Whammer, and where that comes from, I do not know.
I think it has, from what I was reading, it had something to do that he originally came from this part of London or somewhere there in England. It was called Wembley. I mean, when you hear Wembley, typically I thought something to do with Wembley Arena, but no.
Well, that's the area. That's the town.
That's the town where he was from, I guess, or that he lived most of his life, and so.
Seems to be a suburb of London.
Yeah, that's what it seems. Yeah.
You know, but they did that, and when they would be announcing the different players, and they finally got to him, he got the longest and loudest ovations. Yeah. I've seen them a few times live, and let me tell you, when you see him taking that bow, standing up, and sometimes smiling, sometimes not, he was probably the beloved person of all the people. I love Keith too, because I just love his personality.
Yeah.
You know, I have a little less love for Mick Jagger.
Okay.
In that way, but Charlie, there's a movie out, Charlie Is My Darling.
Okay.
And he really is.
Well, yeah. And now here's a kind of hard question to ask you. Now I imagine it's hard for you to even picture the Rolling Stones carrying on with anybody but Charlie, but I guess they've kind of made that decision. Can you even imagine going to see the Stones without Charlie, and what do you think that would be like for you?
I can't.
Yeah.
I just can't. It's just
one of those things.
Same.
Yeah, just one of
It's
those.
just not the same. Come on.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
It's just not the same.
See, they're one of
It
those.
would be hard.
They're one of those bands that get to the point where I think they really are the longest running band, or one of at least one of them. I mean, I do believe when you hear Mick and Keith saying that we're gonna probably die in playing on stage in wheelchairs or die on stage. It's getting to that point where, I mean, even Mick a couple years ago had a heart attack. It's amazing they're still getting out there doing it. I guess they'll be rocking and rolling until the day they die.
That's exactly what's happening, and it's an amazing story that it could last this long.
Yeah. Who would have thought?
Because it's very famously, after a couple of years, that Jagger was being interviewed. This is a black and white interview.
Yeah.
Probably about 65.
Okay.
They said, "Well, how much longer do you think this is going to go?" And hey, I didn't even think it would be going this long.
Yeah, it's funny. I see these old clips of the guys, like these old interview clips. Like you can find them all over YouTube and stuff. And there's clips like very early days, going back to the early days of the Rolling Stones, and like Mick was practically just a teenager, and some of those early records came out.
Goodness, just so, I mean, really,
it makes you
20s,
feel
really early 20s.
Yeah, it makes you feel old when you realize that Charlie was 80 years old and we're what we are. Yeah.
Well, God bless him. What a wonderful man. They left us. He left us with so many great drum beats, riffs, and it was not easy for me to pick up. It took 6 months to get it, in another 6 months to feel comfortable.
Yeah. Now here's a question. You're no longer with the Rolling Stones tribute band, of course, but if you were to get up on stage with anyone and play like a Rolling Stones song, let's say Today or Tomorrow, what do you think that'd be like? Just kind of, because in your head, hey, Charlie just died. Would there be any pressure there? You feel?
Well, I'll tell you, I wouldn't feel any pressure.
Yeah.
But I am going to be sitting in with my old band.
Oh, cool. Tell us about that.
And that's going to be October 2nd. I don't know when this will be released. But
yeah, probably about a week or two. Yeah.
October 2nd at the Coach House.
Okay.
And I will be on stage recreating the role, and my singing partner Marinus Bay will be back with us. It's almost like a family reunion. One of the guys can't make it, but he was invited to be there. He's going to be someplace else.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear, because it's good to hear that you've been able to kind of keep things good between you and the guys. There's no reason it wouldn't be, but I love hearing stuff like that, because even though you're not like back in the band and it's a full reunion or anything like that, it's nice. It's nice to know that if ever such a time comes that the other drummer's not available for whatever reason, that hey, I'm always here, guys. You want to call on me? That's kind of got to be a cool feeling for you.
And that's how we're leaving it at this moment.
Yeah.
I will be their drummer's sub.
Yeah.
As needed and upon availability. But that particular show, October 2nd, will be the Coach House.
You'll be back behind the drums, Vince. That's got to. It will be that. If you is that be your first gig in quite a while? I know you've been working on other stuff as well.
With them, my total for no.
Okay.
I'm working with subbing in a whole bunch of other bands, a whole lot of them actually. And so I'm keeping sharp. I'm still in shape, and besides that second date, the next date, the same band, the Stones band, will be over at the SoCal Fair in Paris.
Oh wow!
So there's 2 dates if you want to come out and see Mick Adams and the Stones.
Yeah, that's the band, Mick Adams and the Stones.
I will be there. It's going to be loads of fun, and one is ticketed, and I guess the other is admission from the fair, probably free. That's just a guess.
Yeah. And now, final question regarding to what you're doing these days, Vince. Am I correct that you were also telling me that last time we talked that you're also involved in a Pretenders tribute band?
I started that up. In fact, we're starting into rehearse next week. Mm-hmm. And that all of that is coming. Gal is fantastic. The name is Rosemary Cox. Amazing. So I've been prepping the material and doing some side sessions with a couple of the guys.
Yeah.
And working out all because it's complicated music to play.
I bet, yeah, and it's very different from
the Pretenders music. Doing Martin Chambers
wow.
stuff, but so I'm really looking forward.
Yeah, that's quite different
happening.
than playing Rolling Stones music. I mean, two different, totally. And again, that just kind of shows your versatility. Well,
different styles. Altogether.
Well, Vince, thanks for doing this today. If you could hold on for just a minute, I want to talk to you about something real quick before I let you go. Thanks for talking to me today. It's been a lot of fun.